Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the greatest rock and roll stories in the universe, all from the fans' perspective. It's Rock Stories with the Brummster. Now, here's the host of the show, my rockin' daddy, the Brummster.
Hey, welcome. It is Rock Stories with the Brummster. And what are Rock Stories with the Brummster? Well, they can vary. We might even have some real artists on sometime. Just wink, wink. But also as well, it's a lot of my radio friends of the Brummster throughout the many decades and eons rocking on the different radio stations we've worked at over the years, right? And over the years, a lot of those radio stations had really cool backstage events. So we get to roll back the curtain, if you will. So you get to see behind the scenes of your favorite concerts, your favorite events, your favorite artists, your favorite bands, and your favorite rock and roll memories. But it's all from the fans' perspective. So, I mean, it's not all radio folks. It's just going to be a big bunch of radio people considering that's who's been in my universe for over 20 years now. But I'm excited today on Rock Stories with the Brummster. Let's get right to it. She's my good friend for, over 20 years now. I can't believe how long it's been. PK, the Redhead. I met her at Soft Rock 97.1 KSEQ Visalia. And I did night flights. And then she was doing overnights, and then I left the station, and she took my overnight show and totally kicked butt and took names. And then she took that evening show that I was doing, and she totally brought it to the top of the chart. She was doing amazing. Your love songs and dedications, I think you were better at that than me. Very cool to have you here. And also at News Talk, AM 1450 K-Tip, she was PK the Redhead there. PK the Redhead in my heart forever. Welcome, Rock and Roll Stories, Rock Stories with the Brummster. PK the Redhead, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for thinking about me, and thank you for the nice comments. And I will say the reason the night flights did so well really had very little to do with me, other than the fact that I was getting tired of Katrina and the Waves and Celine Dion, so I brought my own music, and I had access to K100 stuff. And instead of having 5 drops an hour for requests, it was an all-request show. They let me do that because we didn't know it at the time. They were flipping format from soft rock to hot AC. So I could get away with whatever. And then the numbers happened to reflect the fact that the listeners actually like to be in charge, which is something that consultants and corporate radio seems to forget. You know, it's all about listening.
Right. It's all of the in-betweens that, you know, you don't just come into this business, you know, you have to have your feet grounded in this business in all facets. You've been in radio for quite a while. That has got you backstage. This is part of Rock Stories with the Brummster. We get to peel back the curtain for our listeners. Listeners, thanks for joining us. PK the Redhead. So what's behind the curtain of door number 1 for Rock Stories tonight, PK?
Oh, well, you know, for the most part, from a listener fan perspective, and I'm still a huge fangirl, always have been, and I have always thought of myself that way rather than a on-air personality kind of thing. I just like music and I like groups, and then I get sometimes really tongue-tied and really stupid when I'm around people that I admire a lot. And everybody thinks backstage is great. Backstage kind of sucks because, and if it's an outdoor venue especially, you don't really get a chance to get the good sound quality because you're behind everything. There's the rigging and stuff like that. Except on one occasion and this was at Tachi Palace a number of years ago, and K100, it was cool, 92.9, good times and great oldies. I was hosting a show at Tachi Palace, and I got to introduce and bring out Buddy Guy. There was another artist I don't remember, but headlining was B.B. King, and I didn't get to introduce and bring him out. But he was such a nice man. I got a nice hug from him. It was like hugging a big soft teddy bear.
Oh, and so he was a real sweet guy, huh?
He was an angel. I've seen him. I think that was probably the second time I had seen him. But so I'm backstage, and one of the crew noticed that I had this village idiot grin on my face the whole show. So he said, well, would you like a better seat? I said, yeah. So, you know those dollies that they move the equipment around on?
Yeah.
He had one of those set up on stage, and that's where I watched B.B. King.
Oh, that's what I'm talking
about. On stage with B.B. King, and he was much more mobile at that time. But the idiot grin never faded. I mean, it was there through the whole show. And I have no idea what the crowd thought. I don't care what the crowd thought. I was on stage with B.B. King, and the king.
What can I say? It could have been in your living room while you were kicking it in your recliner. I mean, it was that cool, basically, that intimate there.
Oh yeah, and he was nice. I don't know what was going through. I mean, I'm sure he was focused on doing the show, so he could care less about the strange woman that was up on stage with him. So there was that one, and radio has allowed us some opportunities that not everybody gets.
Yes.
And music radio is kind of different than news talk, because with news talk you don't get to interact with a lot of musical celebrities, except thank you, Judge Roper. He was very instrumental in getting the drug court in Tulare County going. And when the people that had been enrolled in the drug court, when they were finished, then there was the commencement ceremonies, the drug court graduation. And Judge Roper was amazing at getting some fantastic artists. I was always trying to work with him to see if we couldn't get Alice Cooper, because I thought that would have been like the pinnacle.
Yeah.
But he did bring Chuck Negron in, the lead singer for Three Dog Night. I'm a huge fan. I got to have my picture taken with him and got to meet him. He was supposed to, the next morning, be in studio with Hopper and I live on the air, but his health was not good, so he called it in. So there was that one. And how many people get to spend an hour sitting next to their childhood rock god?
Who is it?
And that was when Peter Tork was the guest speaker. And Will Lloyd, we roped him into it, because when we started doing really cool live in-studio interviews, Will Lloyd would come and set it up and record everything and then upload it later. Then a few years down the road, we took that the next step further, or Hopper and Kyle Hopper did, and that was with our weekly Hopper chats that were live that you could see online. But I digress. So Judge Roper used to have a lot of fun in teasing us with who was going to be on. And when I found out that it was Peter Tork, I bloody lost my mind. And he was so cool about everything. He did the monkey walk coming in, and Will sped up the video just a little bit so it looked like the introduction. You probably are way too young to ever have watched the monkey, but I never missed the show.
I was, it's one of those things, being Generation X, being 44 going on 45, I was able to experience everything of the analog world, people not wearing seatbelts, coming home, get home before dark, and we don't care where you are all day. That was the world that we lived in, the world of splicing and cutting our reel-to-reel tape for our requests that we did as radio DJ hosts. all of the production to make sure that because if you didn't hit a sound, that's what people don't understand is that if you did not hit that button and that cart wasn't loaded, there was dead air, right? There literally was dead air. There was no auto. I mean, there was a couple little like carts that would play 3 in a row or something and give you a chance to go poop. But that was about it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I lived for Fantastic Voyage because that was a 7+ minute song. You could have a cigarette and go to the bathroom and still get back to the board in time to trip the next song.
Come on and ride on a Fantastic Voyage. I'm never, ever going to think of that song again the same way. I love it. PK the Redhead, radio veteran, a great friend of the program and of the Brummster. Rock Stories with the Brummster is our podcast, and PK the Redhead is our guest, pulling back the curtain on some behind-the-scenes get-togethers with our favorite bands, artists, concerts. Peter Tork, legendary monkey, on stage with B.B. King, and describes how odd that happened, but yet it happened. It was odd. What a memory. And then, so who else is behind the curtain, PK? Your stories are great so far. I'm so excited. Thanks for coming on Rock Stories.
There's a couple of more from the drug court era that I would be remiss without mentioning, and that was when Paul Williams was in studio.
Yes.
And he liked Hopper because he was taller than Hopper. And for Paul Williams, if some of the younger listeners don't know who he is, he was in Smokey and the Bandit, singer-songwriter, actor. And so I'm kind of boning up on things to ask because he was going to be in studio again. And being the sci-fi nerd that I am, Paul Williams has this fantastic background in performance, right? So, most people would ask about working with Burt Reynolds, being in Smoking and the Bandit, yada, yada, songwriting and stuff. It's like, nope, not me. It's like, dude, I just watched the episode of Babylon 5 you were in. What was that like? And he was like, oh, because he was like, please. It was such a nerd moment.
Well,
such a fangirl nerd moment.
And he also could tell that, oh my gosh, so this isn't somebody that's just trying to flip the fame from something I did 20 years ago and attach themselves to it this morning. No, this is a real person that actually likes Babylon 5, and this is something that's new going on in his life, so it's fresh, so he cares about it probably more. So you probably got more of the real person after that on the interview, huh?
Well, I guess. I know it took him by surprise. And this was well past its franchise. I was watching it on DVD at the time because I belonged to Blockbuster and they would send things to you in the mail. And Joe Walsh was another one. She was not in studio with us. That logistically we just couldn't make that work. And Judge Roper tried, but what I did get with him was I was at the reception prior to the graduation ceremony starting, and once the meet and greet stuff was done, then they ushered press and Mr. Walsh into a room for Q&A for the television and newspaper and stuff like that. And I got as close as I could without, being stalker-ish. And I got the first couple of questions out, and one had to do with his sobriety and his addiction and that sort of thing. And then, but the other question, because it was very obvious that he was uncomfortable talking about his recovery, but it was important enough that he would show up at Judge Roper's request and share his story, and I made mention of that. I said, you seem very uncomfortable talking about this. Why are you putting yourself through this if you're not comfortable? And he said, because if one person gets recovery because of this, my discomfort was worth it. And I thought, not only is he a kick-ass guitar player, he is just, words can't express. It's like, wow. And I know everybody was probably annoyed with me with some of the questions I asked, but that's the way I always did my interviews. I would ask what the normal person would be asking you, not the pre or regurgitated questions over and over and over again, because I'm nosy.
That's a great question. That is a great question. You got him to get real. Once again, Joe Walsh is getting real. You're getting real life emotion out of him. And you know what? The rest of the folks that got annoyed at your question, they're really jealous that they didn't ask it.
Could be. You never know.
Well, anyway, hindsight's 2020. But Rock Stories with the Brummster, Joe Walsh. He's amazing. Did you get to see him perform since you were at the ceremonies? Did he perform some songs? Or is it just...
No, he didn't play. None of the artists performed. They were just talking about their story on how they got recovery and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
He didn't play, but that's all right. I got to chat up Joe Walsh. So every time I see him on like a rockumentary or something now, it's like extra specials. And the same thing with Peter Tork and Paul Williams. Just have kind of that special real person connection, because they weren't performing. They were just talking about how low they had gone and how they got out of it. And, hats off for that. Let's see. And since we're talking about recovery and some folks that are or aren't, and I'm surprised E didn't mention it because I did listen to E's show, and I don't think you were at the Evil Empire when this happened. You might have moved on already. But there was an evening, and Margaret and I had gone to the hockey game, stopped off at the liquor store, not for booze. Margaret needed cigarettes. Stopped off at the liquor store, but we've been listening to ZR on our way home, and Coyote Chris Gerds was talking about Snoop being in the house. And it's like, no way. You're full of it. So while Margaret was in the liquor store, I called the back line, the hotline for ZR, and just was ragging on Chris upside. And he said, no, dude, seriously, he's here. Don't believe me? Come by. So we did. This was probably about 11 o'clock at night. And we pulled into the back parking lot, and there's this big bus. It's like, okay. And when you open the back door to go in that hallway, it's like, oh, yeah, Snoop is definitely in the house.
You mean just opening the door, you got a whiff of Snoop?
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. He was actually there for a radio interview, because they used to do that a lot of the times. They would run the artists around, but it was for B95. Well, B95 was real close to ZR Studio, and Rick Rodham was on. Hey, Rick. Hope things are well for you on the East Coast. Rick was on the air doing nights on ZR, and he had convinced Snoop to come in and do a live interview with him, even though it was rock and not, hip-hop, urban, whatever the correct title is. So it's like, okay. And so when Margaret and I are getting close to the studio, and there's these guys, his posse, I guess, standing guard at the door. And, I can be a little insistent and persistent. So I eventually got into the ZR on-air studio, and I was flat up against the wall, trying to be, quiet and everything, just watching everything. And it was during a break, because they'd done whatever. And Snoop said, do you mind if I roll in here? And Rick's like, and I said, if he won't let you roll in his studio, I'm on the oldie station across the hall. We can go in there. That's fine. He pulled out a gallon baggie. And I was like, but he was very nice. Very, very nice. In fact, he was back, and I forget how much longer it was since our first encounter with the Snoop Dogg. He was doing another radio tour thingy, but just kind of blew through because he was running late. And at that time, he was still coaching Pop Warner football or whatever it was. So he had to be back in L.A. in 2 hours, so he was already going to be late. So he just kind of blew through, and everybody was lining the halls so they could get to see Snoop. And he was always very nice, very chill, very polite, probably very mood altered or something.
Medicated. Yes.
Yeah. Today, how's that?
So when you met Snoop, Rock Stories with the Brummster, folks, Rock Stories with the Brummster, behind the scenes, pulling the curtain back for you, your favorite bands, artists, Rock Stories with the Brummster. We're rocking with PK the Redhead, radio compadre of the Brummster over the past 20 plus years. And she's got some great stories on today's episode. Paul Walker, Peter Tork, B.B. King, and now she meets the famous Snoop Dogg, but she doesn't just meet Snoop Dogg. She meets his gallon bag. So now, hey, just being that we're in California, as a connoisseur, Snoop Dogg probably has what would be considered, I don't know, top shelf if you compared with, say, really good liquor or something like that. I mean, call it top shelf. So what would you say in your opinion about what he had rocking?
He didn't spark up in studio. He waited till he was done, and then he got on his bus. But Chris got to go on the bus. Chris got to play PlayStation on Snoop's bus.
What?
And when he said when you open the door to the bus, it was truly like Pismo fog rolling out. So, but that's, but he was still very nice, polite enough, and he didn't spark up in the building because he kind of knew that would be like a bad thing.
No, FCC stuff and all that, but he was cool as far as like his composure and in other words, what we see on TV. Basically, you can tell us what you see is what you get with that dude, huh? He is who you see, huh?
Yeah, no attitude. He was just, real nice, and he was, I'm sure, tired because this was not the first radio interview that he was doing, in studio interviews. It had probably been a really long day. I mean, if it was after 11 o'clock for us, and I don't know where he had been before and where he was headed after, but and there's such a difference between some artists. I mean, some of them are very open and accepting. Jazz artists are the best at that sort of thing. I mean, they don't keep anybody at arm's length. And then there's some of the rockers that are kind of not so kind. But I was fortunate enough to never cross paths with anybody that had an attitude other than, I will say, I'm telling myself here, other than the Goo Goo Dolls, they were a little, and it was my very, 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 very first radio interview, and I was filling in, this was still on KSEQ. I had filled in for whoever was doing midday at the time, and our program director came in and said, "You're doing a live interview with Goo Goo Dolls at whatever time," and I went, "What? I don't know." He said, "Just roll tape on it." And I said, "Okay, but what do I ask him?" He said, "Whatever you want to ask. Ask what you want." It's like, I have no idea what I should ask. So I immediately called my brother, who was a huge Goo Goo Dolls fan at the time, thinking, Joe will have something. Joe will give me some questions that will sound intelligent. And Joe was at work on patrol and never called me back. So I kind of stumbled through it, and it was starting to drag. And they sounded obviously bored. Maybe they figured that they were dealing with somebody that was new in the business and didn't know really what to ask, that sort of thing. And so I'm trying to liven it up and lighten things up a little bit, and it's toward the end, and I said, I don't care what anybody says. You guys don't look anything like the Hansons. And it was,
what'd they
and
say?
It was crickets. And it was crickets. And then I could just see them like rolling their eyes and puking or something, but it's like, and so I wrapped things up, and it's like, oh my God, I hope nobody listened to this. I hope nobody heard this. Oh my God. Charlie never said anything that I remember, But I just felt like, oh my God, my radio career is over with. How dumb can I be? So, but I guess they're being like, feeling like they're being put out was well earned on my part.
Oh, and these experiences, the pulling back the curtain, PK the Redhead, radio friend of the Brummster Rock Stories with the Brummster Podcast, episode number 6. PK the Redhead sharing some great stories today. PK, without a doubt, being in radio, you know, people think they can just do it. And I noticed there's a lot of stations that they'll just hire someone to come in, do some voice tracking that's doing some college class as an intern and get them on the air or whatever. And that's how some people start, not trying to down it. But we started the old-fashioned way where we had to board operate. We weren't allowed on the air until we proved ourselves with fake air check tapes. I mean, just to jump back into the radio stories, along with the great rock stories you've provided today, you know, do you think that it's radio's anywhere near the quality that it used to be?
No. And you know, when you spoke with Hopper earlier and E. Curtis, I mean, those are true veterans of radio. They were well before everything was computerized. There's still needle burns on records. That's how you cue things up. We got in at a good time, and me more so, because then right after me, then they started, the pendulum started swinging the other way, more toward voice tracking. Because when I was at the Eagle Empire, I was on 3 different radio stations, 3 different formats under 3 different names, and you could do 3 different shows, voice tracked, in about 40 minutes. And that's, you know, corporate radio doesn't care about the listeners. They're caring about, here's an opportunity, the commercials, to sell people stuff. Corporate radio doesn't care really what it sounds like. All they want is your ears so that they can tell their advertisers, we have this share and this is where you should be putting your money.
Right.
And that and collective contesting and stuff like that. It's just like, how fake can you get? We had one guy that was part of the Evil Empire that was voice tracking from South Florida. And the way things were set up on the WAN and the LAN and that sort of thing, we could see everything unless somebody dubbed the wrong song with the wrong number information. So when it shows up on the log, you're pre-selling or back-selling, whatever. And there were a couple of times that he would back-sell something that hadn't even been played, and, you know, but corporate radio doesn't care about those mistakes. You and I do. Those of us that really cared about what we were playing and doing and our listeners and hoping they were having a good time. It got away from being personality driven. Like when I grew up listening to radio, right. It was the jock was what you listened to. I mean, and I remember a couple of times when it would bleed through Wolfman Jack on pirate radio. I mean, that will never, ever, ever happen again. Ever.
And in a sense, we're trying to bring back through new technology, the DJs getting back in the building, if you will, you know, over at rockradio559.com, Brian's station. You know, that's kind of what we're sort of attempting in a sense, is cutting out all the middleman and the corporate, and then being in a sense like microbrews, how they came and disrupted, and they weren't a big slice of the market segment, but they were able to disrupt enough and create enough value to where every single distributor now bought up all of the microbrews and turned them into even, you know, bigger parts of the market. So just like that, we have a value because we have no overhead. We're doing it as a hobby. We all have real jobs. but we love radio, so we're producing something that's what you're talking about, how radio used to have the personality. Wolfman Jack, the DJ was a celebrity, back then, right? Like Rick Dees and Casey Kasem. And I mean, you're absolutely right. You tuned in because not just to hear the music, but the way the DJ was going to ramp it up and the way the DJ was going to get you excited about what was coming up next. It was an experience, not just, this is what we're playing now and here's what's next.
Yeah, and for me, my radio hero locally growing up was Paul Fredericks at KCOK in Tulare. And, when you're 9 years old, you figure they all live in the same building, right? And he was just my idol. I called lots of requests in. I when I was probably about 10 or 11, maybe, had heard that he was doing a radio station remote in Visalia across from what was then Whitefront on Mooney Boulevard. And so I made my parents stop. We were going into Visalia for whatever. Anyway, we lived in Tulare. And so I made them stop when I found the trailer, and I was just like, oh, here's this voice. Now I have a face to put to it. And he's going to talk to me, and I'm going to tell him what I want to hear, which was undone by the Guess Who. And I didn't understand how radio worked at the time. I figured that I just showed up, and then when I left, he would play my song, but that's not what happened. And although I made my folks cruise Mooney a couple of times with the radio on, hoping to hear it, we never did. And then I finally, just before he moved from Tulare to Sanger or Selma, and this has only been a few years now, I finally got to meet him again as an adult, and I got to hand him an air check tape of his.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it was one, because he had gotten rid of so much stuff. I mean, he was involved with the Meltzer dances, and he was Tulare County's Dick Clark. So he had purged a lot of his radio memorabilia. And I worked with a young man who now does master control in Cleveland for a Fox affiliate station. And I think he probably has an air check tape for anybody that was ever on the air in the Central Valley in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And when he found out that I was a huge fan of Paul Fredericks, one day he shows up and he hands me a cassette. And he says, well, here's an air check tape of Paul Fredericks. It was in February, and it was a Super Bowl Sunday, and it had been raining. And that's pretty much all I can remember about his air check tape. But when I found out that he was going to be moving, I was able to drop by and invade his space with he and his coffee buddies and give him his air check tape. And I went fangirl again, because that's what I do.
That is so cool. And folks, this is the radio that we want to bring back to you. So the juxtaposed next to the corporate radio that the evil empire's doing, where they don't care how good it sounds and they don't care about the personalities. You're rocking with the Brummster on Rock Stories with the Brummster. And I've decided, PK, the Brummster is officially now. This is a character. This is exactly, this is the personalities back in radio, baby. Yeah, 5 to 7 p.m. every Friday, rocking the hard drive at 5 with the Brummster, and 11 a.m. Every Sunday for Rock Stories with the Brummster, like this episode right here. Also Anchor.fm and Spotify. PK the Redhead, I've got to let you go, but I love you so much, and I thank you so much for pulling the curtain back for our Rock Stories with the Brummster listeners today on all of these behind the scenes, stories with the stars. I mean, each and every one of them was special. And I thank you for bringing that to us today. God bless you. Thank you so much, PK.
Hey, well, thank you for thinking of me, and it was my pleasure, and have a great rest of your week.
Excellent. Hang on the line for our engineers just a moment. You're doing Rock Stories with the Brummster, and that's PK the Redhead. She is totally Rad. You can check her out. Look up Pamela Whitmire on Facebook. But at the end of the day, if you look up PK the Redhead, you're going to find a treasure trove from all the great stuff that she's done over the years, especially news here in Tulare County, and just, got her finger on the pulse and still to this day participates so much in our community. So totally rocking with the rock stories today. Snoop Dogg. Oh, wow. Peter Tork, BB King. Wow, some great stories. Thanks, PK. Rock stories with the Brummster. Stay tuned.